talked about by most people in a way that is helpful to those who need it the most. And tonight, I intend to do justice to those who are in that very situation. So, when someone has wronged someone at any particular point in their life, there's always the chance for restitution within a timeline, right? So if you have, in the case of, I've talked about this before in a book I wrote on dreams, that when it comes to the alcoholic and the alcohol, let's take the sort of stereotypical psychological example where the alcoholic's father, as a child, this individual as a child at this point in, we'll say, her life, and the father's an alcoholic, beats the mother, and the mother goes back to the father, and she's, I didn't know, feigns ignorance, all this kind of stuff, right? And then, right, the typical female response in these dysfunctional family systems. And to separate from that as a child is impossible. And so the timeline is pretty short, right? Pretty small. Because the child's first impression of the relationship cannot be changed, ever. These memories are imprinted in the mind, and they affect the base of the brain, their spine, their memory, their lack of memory. They're not going to ever not experience what they experienced. And the amount of gray matter, the amount of potential they have for intercepting their amygdala is greatly reduced. In the split seconds that it takes to, the prefrontal cortex to intervene in the most critical and crucial times. And that is where the greatest of us can possibly occur. And so, parents owe it to their children, parents, caregivers, guardians, people who are actively in custody and of their children and actually have power over them. They have actual empirical power over them. Then they too are responsible. Anybody who is in that situation, anybody who has that child or those children, to extend the analogy, as many children in that family that go through that, anyone who has power over them, even if it's not directly, but they have influence. Teachers who know something fishy is going on at home, but look the other way. Priests, popes, you name it. Neighbors. They all have a form of influence. And that is why society is fucked up. Because children are put last. Right? They can't vote, they don't have money, they don't have a job, they don't have income, they don't have influence, they don't have status, they don't have height, they don't have muscles, right? A 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, is not going to be intimidating, whether female, boy, girl, male, well, boy, girl, whether it's a boy, whether the child is a boy or a girl, it's not going to be intimidating, and that is to these in these power dynamics, they're inconsequential, right? To these authoritarians who just want power and control over innocent, young, helpless, independent. Nothing is more innocent, young, helpless, innocent, and nothing is more innocent, helpless, and dependent and important than a child in this world. And in particular, especially, your own child, right? And so that is, that is incredibly monstrous. And so, parents sacrifice their children all the time for other people's children, just for the sake of status, power, prestige. And it's terrible. It's terrible. And, I have some direct experience with this myself in terms of having signed away my parental rights. When I say experience, I mean the actual form of making that split decision to not be in my daughter's presence. The problem with admitting this is, of course, is that where there's guilt, there's anger. When there's anger, there's other people who are guilty, and when other people are guilty and you're angry, they're not going to actually respond appropriately and justly, of course, because then they would have to take back everything that they took. That made that position the easiest path for me to choose in the short term. And and I knew at the time it wasn't the best decision for me, and more importantly for my daughter. And I was consoled by a philosopher not to go through with, the divorce, but not necessarily to well, I wasn't I wasn't told what to do by anyone. And philosophy is, and that's not the purpose of philosophy. But just looking back, I know that there's nothing that I can do except remind those who haven't made that, gone to that fork in the road where one side of the fork is easier, or where one ladder is easier to climb. And that is, it's not good to blame other people. When there's two people involved in a marriage, the other people are just as responsible. Of the other person in that one you're married to is just as responsible as you are. And so, in my situation, she ran away with the baby and kidnapped her from me. And so, and hid away from me as soon as she was born. And so, this isn't something that I can control. I mean, you can't control another person's actions any more than through your speech. unless you're willing to grasp for that which doesn't help your own flesh and blood. And this is, this is the position that I was in. And so freedom of speech is dead because there's so many guilty, and in this example I've forwarded here, wherefore it would seem that it's inevitable and impossible to extract any possible fruit from this equation. It's not going to get any better for those who don't want the best for my own daughter. I mean, I don't know where she is, and that's as much as I want to say about that. What matters more than anything is what I can do for philosophy for her, my daughter, so that I can become the greatest philosopher of all time that ever existed, forever and always existed throughout history, continues to exist, that she will know she was important and mattered in some manner beyond that which I can communicate with my direct physical encounter, that I don't legally have permission to, that I don't legally, I'm not a lawyer, don't know the language to use here, just that it's a legally unprecedented circumstance for me to be in, to want to bond with my own daughter and admit that before the world, of which I knew, and to now know the difference between good and evil when the swords are already drawn. It's not the best thing, and it's not the worst thing.